Hello, everyone. This is David L. Gordon, and I've got Steve Martindale on the phone, and we're going to talk about films today, aren't we, Steve?
Yeah, I'm with the film festival, David. Thanks for having us on today.
Oh, it's our pleasure. We're excited about the content that you're about to put out there. And so what's the venue for all this?
Well, we're doing 6 films at Fulford Hall next week. And as you probably know, we've been on hiatus for the last year and a half or more since our last festival was in late February, early March of 2020. We were one of the very last festivals in the entire country to complete before things started to shut down with the pandemic.
Yeah, I
So
remember that, yeah.
our timing was very good last time. We were very fortunate, but of course, for our festival in what would have been our festival in 2021 was canceled, and so we haven't actually screened any films here on Salt Spring since March of 2020.
So this is an exciting time for you, and it looks like you've got some pretty darn good films coming up, eh?
Yeah, we've chosen 6 of the top films from festivals over the last year. As you probably know, a lot of film festivals went digital during the pandemic. So they continued on. A lot of the bigger festivals got government funding to offer films online. And the local festival, the Salt Spring Film Festival, we didn't really have the capacity to do that. It's quite involved. So we just went on hiatus. But some of the larger festivals, like the Vancouver International Film Festival and Hot Docs in Toronto, those are festivals that we would normally send people to scout for new films.
Sure.
And this past year, a lot of them put all their films online and arranged for people to watch them at home.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
some of our board members, our screening committee members, they watched a lot of those films over the course of the last year from other festivals, and they've chosen 6 of their favorites that we're going to screen at Fulford Hall next weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We're doing 2 films a day.
Well,
For those
let's
3
talk about the gala opening then. What's that all about?
Well, we don't exactly have a gala opening per se. What we do have is we've got 3 filmmakers coming from off Ireland, so we're excited about that. We have Jennifer Abbott, who is a longtime Gulf Island resident who lives in Vancouver now. She's best known for a film called The Corporation, which you might remember back in 2003.
That was a very important doc, yeah.
It's interesting because it was a relatively low budget film, but it became the most profitable documentary in Canadian history and the most awarded documentary in Canadian history.
Wow.
And it caused quite a sensation. It was Joel Backen is the law professor at UBC who wrote the book on which that film was based. And his premise was that corporations essentially exhibit the same traits as psychopaths. And
Yeah, you know what? I have heard that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
so that was his thinking, his premise in his book, which was then turned into the film The Corporation. And now, nearly 20 years later, the same people have come back to make the sequel, which is called The New Corporation.
Right.
And it's based on Joel's more recent book. And what they're looking at now is how corporations are essentially taking over the democratic process around the world. And what they're doing is they're positioning themselves or depicting themselves as socially responsible. And how
And
some
what is the subtitle of this film?
the unfortunately necessary sequel.
I think that
So,
says it all. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good subtitle. So Joel and Jennifer, who are the co-directors, will both be here. Joel Backen and Jennifer Abbott. They're both going to be here Friday night, December the 10th, to present that film.
Right.
And Salt Spring residents have not had the opportunity to see this film yet, so we're quite excited about that.
Excellent.
Now, Jennifer Abbott is very prolific. She has 2 films this year,
Yeah.
and we're showing both of them. So on Saturday night, Jennifer Abbott will still be here to present her own film, The Magnitude of All Things. And the premise with this film, it's also a documentary. She is looking at grief and comparing personal grief to ecological grief. Jennifer lost her sister to cancer.
Right.
And she documents her sister's death and compares the grief that she experienced personally to what people are experiencing globally with climate change and with the loss of habitat. And so her film is winning prizes around the world.
Well,
And we're
it sounds very, very timely, Steve.
very timely, and also it's very cinematic.
Right.
She filmed it around the world in a number of different countries. It's a great film to see on the big screen. So we really recommend people come out to Fulford Hall on Saturday night to see Jennifer Abbott's film, The Magnitude of All Things.
Excellent.
That's
So
fun.
that
I
sounds
should be
like a
doing fun.
really that sounds like a very strong opening night.
Well, as I say, the opening night is the Friday night, which is the new corporation. That's at 7 o'clock, and then the next night we're showing Jennifer's other film, The Magnitude of
Right.
All Things,
Yep.
also at 7 o'clock. And we have a third guest who'll be here for the Saturday screening at 4 o'clock, and that guest is Nettie Wild, who a lot of Canadians will recognize. She's one of the preeminent Canadian documentary filmmakers. She first came on the scene back in the late 80s. She did a film called The Rustling of Leaves.
Right.
I'm sorry, A Rustling of Leaves Inside the Philippine Revolution. And she also had a film called A Place Called Chiapas about Mexico. And in both of those films, she went into revolutionary movements in other countries and documented kind of from behind the front lines of that civil unrest. So she became really well known for doing those kinds of films, really set on the front lines of revolutions and social movements. She's been quite prolific over the years, produced,
Well, that's
directed a number
shoes
of
on
films.
pavement. That's kind of shoes on pavement kind of filmmaking, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and if you've seen either of them, they're probably available online. Rustling of Leaves and A Place Called Chiapas.
Right.
They're both really they kind of grab you by the throat because she's there with her camera, in the jungles with the guerrillas who are fighting their own governments, and it's pretty surprising some of the access that she got in making those documentaries. So in more recent years, Nettie Wild has also lent her talents as a story editor, and a story editor will assist another filmmaker in shaping their documentary. So the film we're screening is called First We Eat, and the director is Suzanne Crocker. She's a retired physician who lives up in Dawson City, Yukon.
Oh yeah.
And she'll be known to Salt Spring residents because about 6 years ago we screened her first film, which was called All the Time in the World. And it was the most popular film at our festival in 2015. Her first film was about moving her family from southern Canada up to the Yukon and kind of detaching from the world and detaching from their schedules so that they could have more time as a family. And that film was very popular. And Nettie Wild was also the story editor on that film. And now Suzanne has a new film called First We Eat, and she's done something pretty interesting with her family. She decided that for a full year they were going to eat only food that they could source locally around Dawson City, Yukon.
Oh,
And so
that's a tough job.
She eliminated all store-bought food from her house. She took everything out of her fridge and cupboard, even the salt and the sugar and the tea and the coffee. She got rid of all of it.
Well, that's
Stripped
about
her-
as far north as you can go in this country. There's not a lot around to eat.
They're up towards the Arctic Circle there,
Yeah.
so they have a very limited growing season. So the challenges they faced were things like access to salt because they're not by the ocean. They found that they were really deprived of salt. But what they did is they sourced meat and fish and vegetables and fruit all produced locally. And a lot of it they harvested themselves, and some of it they purchased from their neighbors. And of course, they talked to their indigenous neighbors who have survived for millennia without store-bought food. So they talked to the indigenous people about traditional foods, traditional northern foods, and they really changed their diet for a full year. And of course, she's got 3 teenagers who were not necessarily on board with this little project, but she did it as an experiment.
I'll bet, yeah.
And of course, if you're familiar with northern communities, the crazy thing is they're really dependent on imported food from down south. So they ship up all of this processed food, which is very expensive, and things like fresh produce is crazy expensive in northern communities.
Yeah.
And they can produce things locally. It's just some of what they produce is different from what you would get down here.
Well, the thing is, Steve, you can always get yourself a tasty piece of moose steak or maybe some char. There's lots of food up there.
They did both of those things. They shoot a moose and they catch fish. They harvest wild berries. They harvest local greens.
Right.
They even talked to some of their neighbors who were doing things like growing apples and wheat and rye at latitudes where those things really shouldn't be growing. But they were doing it with things like having greenhouses heated by wood stoves. And although they have a very short growing season, they have very long days in the summer.
Right.
So they were able to find a really surprising variety of foods that were locally produced. And the reason this film is so topical, of course, is that
timely.
one of the things people may not realize is that most grocery stores only stock about 3 to 5 days worth of food. And they're really dependent on constant deliveries. And what we've seen in the last year, of course, is things like the wildfires this summer and the flooding we've had recently, which washes out roads. And so a lot of communities can be isolated very easily. And within a week, the grocery stores will be empty. And then what happens?
Well, this is a really strong argument for producing the things that you need locally. And I'm just going to interject for a second here, Steve, and mention to the audience that we are broadcasting from Salt Spring Island. This is Gulf Islands Community Radio, and I've got Steve Martindale on the line, and we're talking about the coming film festival next weekend. And we're going to talk, I guess, a little bit about the final night and the big film. But before that, what else is on the agenda? And how do people get in touch with you? Where do they find this information?
Well, the best thing to do is to go directly to our website, which is saltspringfilmfestival.com. And from our website, there are links to each of the films' ticket. There are links to purchase tickets online. We encourage people to buy the tickets online in advance. That's going to speed things up at the door. One of the complications, of course, as I'm sure people know, is that now at the door, we're going to be screening for vaccine passports and asking people for ID. And so that's going to slow things down at the door a little bit. So we're hoping people will arrive with pre-purchased tickets so that we don't have to sell too many tickets at the door. And the tickets are $10 each plus service charges. So it works out to about $12 a ticket, except for the two films on the Friday, Saturday night, the later shows at 7 o'clock, which are The New Corporation and The Magnitude of All Things. Those two films we're charging $15 plus service charges. So that works out to about $17 per ticket.
Yeah, very affordable for a lot of incredible information you're not going to get anywhere else.
Yeah, these are films that are not available online.
Right.
For the most part, you can't find them elsewhere. You will be able to in the future, of course, but these are all fairly recent films that that people generally don't have other access to, and of course, it's the only opportunity to see them on the big screen. And for 3 of the 6 films, of course, we have the filmmakers present to talk to the audience afterwards about the films and the process of making them.
Right. Interesting. So let's get to the big. Let's get to the Sunday.
So Sunday we're showing 2 films. Each day we're showing a film at 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock. I should briefly mention the very first film, which is Beans. That's on Friday at 4 o'clock. It's the only drama that we're showing. The other 5 are all documentaries.
Right.
And the very opening film, 4 o'clock on Friday, is called Beans. It's a drama by Tracy Deer, who's a Mohawk filmmaker from back east. And she's primarily made documentaries, but now she's come up with a feature film starring a young Mohawk girl. And the story is set in 1990 during the Oka crisis. And people will remember the Oka crisis when the local Mohawk community blocked a bridge, and
the big stare down.
I'm sorry.
The big stare down.
Yeah, it was a standoff for 78 days, and the government brought in the military.
And they were standing face to face. I mean, their faces were 6 inches apart, Steve.
Yeah, it was the images on TV back in 1990 were pretty shocking to most Canadians who were oblivious to a lot of the issues that were being raised.
Sure.
Interestingly, I actually grew up just down the road from Oka, and when the Oka crisis erupted in 1990, I was really shocked by what I saw on television, because to me it looked like a foreign country. I didn't recognize that area, because I, like a lot of non-Indigenous people, I'd grown up kind of oblivious to the presence of Native people in our area. Yeah. So when I saw those images on television, I thought, well, who are these people, and how is it that I lived literally down the road from that Mohawk Reserve, and I was just unaware that they even existed? So Tracy Deer has made a film. It's a narrative film, but it incorporates some of the footage of the actual conflict. So she's taken the newsreel footage and used it as the backdrop for a story of a young Mohawk girl who gets involved in this crisis and has to grow up very fast.
Must have been tough.
In the midst of the conflict. So that's at Friday at 4. And then our last night, Sunday, we're showing 2 films. We're showing one called Firestarter, the story of Bangarra. And Bangarra is an Australian Aboriginal dance company. And this is a documentary about the 3 Aboriginal brothers who were founders of the dance company and turned it into kind of a global phenomenon. The Bangarra Dance Theatre became internationally recognized. And this documentary about the dance theater, it includes all kinds of amazing dance sequences, a very visual film. It's really good to see on the big screen.
Right.
And it won the equivalent of the what would be considered the Australian Oscar. So Australia has, like a lot of countries, they have their Academy of Arts for television and cinema, and this film, Firestarter, won the Australian Oscar for Best Documentary. So we're really looking forward to screening that at 4 o'clock on Sunday.
Okay.
And then the one that I think will be most of interest to your radio listeners is our final film at 7 o'clock on Sunday.
Oh, yeah, this looks very, very exciting. And I just want, before you talk about it, I just want to mention that a lot of people our age, and I don't know what your age is, but it doesn't matter. A lot of people that were around at the time remember that very clearly, and it's about something that I guess maybe people can relate to now, because it was a similar time, don't you think?
We're talking about Jimmy Carter?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so the documentary is called Jimmy Carter, Rock and Roll President, and it looks back on how Jimmy Carter won the race to the White House back in the 70s.
He came out of nowhere. He came out of nowhere, Steve.
Yeah, he really did seem to. And what a lot of people may have forgotten is that he had the support of a lot of sort of counterculture musicians.
Yep.
And it's kind of surprising because Jimmy Carter himself was a white evangelical Christian.
Well, I think, just to interject for a second, I think that this was a carryover from the McGovern time.
Yeah, it's all a little before my time, so I'm
okay.
That's Christian to comment on it.
Yeah.
But it's a fascinating documentary. It really shows how Jimmy Carter had the support of a lot of very famous musicians and a really diverse support.
Well, mention a few of them. Mention some names.
The main ones that he had the backing of in his presidential campaign, actually in the primary campaign leading up to him getting the Democratic nomination, he had the support of the Allman Brothers and Willie Nelson.
Yeah.
Willie Nelson tells a story about smoking pot in the White House, mm-hmm. and also Bob Dylan is another one who was backing him. And they actually would perform at this time and bring Jimmy Carter out onto stage with them to introduce him to their audiences. Mm-hmm. So they had a huge influence on getting him elected initially. And then once he was in the White House, he then involved a lot of these people in his inauguration and in subsequent events at the White House. So this film is just chock full of these. A lot of them are quite rare performances by people like Mahalia Jackson, who performed at the inauguration,
yep.
Ray Charles, James Brown, Paul Simon, Aretha Franklin, Sarah Vaughan, Dizzy Gillespie, a lot of African American performers, because he had
and a there's a wide range of styles and types
Oh,
of
for
music
sure.
there.
Yeah, as well as a Willie Nelson. So there's the country
Right.
audience as well. Loretta Lynn is
Hmm.
in the film. Charlie Daniels,
Yep.
um, and there's brief appearances made by Dolly Parton and Cher, who went to the White House with Greg Allman, who she was dating at the time,
Right.
and the Staples Singers are featured in the film. So there's very brief clips
Wonderful.
of these archival performances by all of these incredible men.
I gotta say, Steve, a lot of the names that you just mentioned are artists that we frequently play on Gulf Islands Community Radio.
Well, they're all pretty much household names, and they're
Sure.
they're all hugely influential. And it's remarkable to see all of this footage of them interacting with Jimmy Carter, and because Jimmy Carter came across as pretty square, right? He was very religious, and he was a peanut farmer, and it was kind of sort of easy to see him as kind of
A Southern
not.
gentleman. I always saw him as a Southern gentleman.
Yeah, and he wasn't exactly hip or seemingly all that modern, and yet he had the support of this really wide range of artists. A lot of them were counterculture figures,
Yes.
people who were
Or
you know
deeply spiritual, like Mahalia Jackson.
for sure. Yeah, and as I say, a real range. He had. There's been a real shift, I think, in political perceptions. Now we think of white evangelicals as being Trump supporters, and we don't really think of them as embracing diversity in the U.S. So to see Jimmy Carter, who is also a white evangelical, but he was really quite deeply immersed in the African American community and had enormous support from them. And so times have really changed in that regard. The
Well,
Carters are just
everything,
remarkable people. I mean, I think
everything,
they're, they're,
everything has changed, and that brings me to maybe my final point of this conversation, which is, it's time for us to look back and see where we were as an indication of where we might go soon. And I think that the Carter era presents all kinds of cooperation and things that were happening that I really hope happen again. Don't you, Steve?
oh, for sure. I think history has been very kind to Jimmy Carter because I think he was only a one-term president, and it was fairly easy for people to dismiss him as having been weak because when he left office, it was under the cloud of the
Iranian crisis
right, the Iranian crisis with
and
the
the oil embargoes
exactly.
and problems that were going on at the time. There was
Yeah,
lineups at the pump, and I think Jimmy really took it on the chin because of those things. But to be honest, I think those are things that were outside of his control.
for sure. And in the 4 years that he was in the White House, the Americans didn't go to war. They didn't drop bombs on anybody. They didn't invade anybody.
Right, right.
So, in retrospect, I think he looks pretty good by comparison to most of the presidents that we've had since.
Or the one that came right before him.
Yeah, right before him and right
The
after
elected
him.
one I'm talking about.
Yeah, and then of course, you can't talk about Jimmy Carter without talking about all the incredible work he's done since leaving office.
Right.
He and his wife Rosalind have done amazing work with Habitat for Humanity, and they've also devoted themselves to eradicating guinea worm, which like smallpox was this massive global campaign to eradicate this disease from the world, and they have been quite successful in that. And it's something that nobody else was taking on,
Right.
and they've put resources into that, which
Well,
it's a condition that's pretty much unknown in developed countries, but
yeah.
it's a real scourge in developing countries.
I think his
And
post-regime work paints him in a much better light than any of the other presidents that I can think of.
oh, sure. And you look at somebody like Tony Blair, who left
Right.
office and devoted
Yeah.
himself to personal profit.
Right.
Jimmy Carter has really done the opposite. I mean, he's
Yeah. Well, we won't talk about the Clinton Foundation today, but what we will do is one last mention of where people find all this wonderful information and where they go. and how they can attend these wonderful events, what the prices are. Indicate a little bit about the packages that you have before you go.
Yeah, so it's at Fulford Hall this coming Friday through Sunday, Friday, December 10th to Sunday the 12th. We're showing 6 films. We're doing 2 a day at 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. each day. The tickets are mostly $10 per film plus service charges. And for the Friday and Saturday shows at 7 with the visiting filmmakers, we're charging $15 plus service charges. Information and ticket links can be found on our website, which is saltspringfilmfestival.com. And we hope people will come down to Fulford Hall. It's a bit of an experiment for us as the film festival, sure, because traditionally we have been based at the high school, and we have also shown a number of films at Art Spring.
Right. That's a wonderful venue. You know, that is a really excellent place.
Well, the pandemic has presented all kinds of challenges for the various venues in terms of seating capacity. And so we're doing a bit of an experiment here with having this weekend of films down at Fulford Hall. And it'll be a bit of a precursor to what we do in the new year. We'll probably have some films at Art Spring in the new year. And then in early March, we're looking towards having our regular festival come back. Although we're not quite sure yet what shape it's going to take. We're probably going to be based at Art Spring and possibly several other venues in early March. And we've been busy previewing other films to bring to the Salt Spring audience for our regular festival, which, as I say, was on hiatus last year. And but we do expect to be back this coming March.
That's great. Well, I'm really pleased that we had this conversation. And, you know, I look forward to seeing how things go and seeing the films, and I appreciate you coming on the air with us today. We'll be playing this interview several times over the course of the week as we get closer, and I want you to stay in contact. If there's anything we need to know, I want you to get a hold of me right away. And
I appreciate that.
I would love to hear from some of the filmmakers, some of the people that you've got attending, if they get the time and the opportunity.
Yeah, we can certainly arrange that, and I hope people here in Salt Spring come on down to Fulford Hall next weekend and see some of these films and meet the filmmakers.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it.
Thanks, David.